Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the meeting for the Housing Scrutiny Commission. Councillor Jason Ottery, Commission of the Chair, and just general housekeeping rules, which many of you around the table are familiar with already. There are no planned fire alarm tests this evening, but should you hear any fire alarms, just make your way to St John's Churchyard, which is just off George Street. Council staff will be available to help should any help be needed. Public toilets are located by the reception just towards the back. The meeting is being live streamed to the council's YouTube channel, and a recording of the meeting is viewable by YouTube after the meeting. I don't see any members of the public here, lest any of the officers are disguised as members of the public. No, so I'm not going to read that bit out. And if you want to ask any questions, you can raise your hands and give you the opportunity to ask questions should you need to do so. Should we go through normal agenda items of business to start off with? I've received apologies of absence from Councillors Livingston, Councillor McCash, of which Councillor Foster's standing instead for, and Councillor Rose, and co-opted member Brian O'Brien. Just for note, Councillor Jane Salmon's no longer on this commission because of the change in proportionality mix, of which we have a Green Party member. So just confirming voting members. Yes, we'll start with you, Councillor Harper.
Ketsia Harper, ward member for Faraday Ward. Sorry, Councillor for Faraday Ward.
Councillor Sam Foster for Faraday Ward.
I'm Councillor Emily Tester for North Bermondsey Ward, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Commission.
Councillor Jason Ottery, St Giles Ward, and Chair.
Councillor Barry Hargrove, Peckham Ward.
Ina, Leaseholders Council.
Thank you. I know I said that voting members, but we don't vote in this commission, so everyone was just introduced. Notifications of any items that I deem as urgent. I don't think there were any disclosures of interest that are disclosures of interest and dispensations, pecuniary or otherwise.
No, Chair.
We'll go from left to right.
Devon Mansion resident.
No disclosure of interest or dispensation.
I'm a council leaseholder, Chair.
There is a reference to an item on where I live on the Tustin, so although there is no pecuniary interest, but I just thought it's better to mention it.
Yeah, council leaseholder, and also item on voids, the Aylesbury estate is referenced, which is where I live.
Can we approve the minutes held on the 4th of February 2026 for those who were there? Approved. Agreed. You went there. Cool.
Well, I had to absent myself from an item,
Yeah.
so I can't.
Okay. Thank you very much. All good. So we'll start off with the first item, which is the interview with the cabinet member for council homes, and the team that will be accompanying her. So, Councillor Mwanganje, you can come up. I know it's your first commission. Welcome. And the idea is that there are a broad range of issues and topics that we principally wanted to cover off, but appreciate that the issues that we've noted to you we're not restricted to those entirely. It's a cabinet member interview. However, just so that we're focused in the meeting, we will focus on the social landlord performance and communications, the progress in implementing recommendations regarding to Fair Street, Devon Mansions, Canada, Kirby Estates, the QHIP Major Works Programme, progress implementing the Good Landlord Programme, empty homes, voids and related issues. There are 5 accompanying reports which I'm sure members have seen, but we'll hand over to you, Councillor Mwanganje, to open up for the first maybe 5 minutes or so, and then if any officers want to add anything to what Councillor Mwanganje has mentioned, feel free to do so, then we'll just get straight into questions. Is that okay with everyone? All good, cool. Over to you.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. First interview as the Council Homes Cabinet member. I just wanted to start by thanking the Commission for taking on these very important pieces of work. Since the recommendations were agreed in Cabinet in December 2025, there's been a considerable amount of work that has been done into the major works projects of Devon Mansions / First Street, Canada Estate and Kirby Estate. 27 of the 36 recommendations have been implemented and completed, but I think it's important to note here that when we are talking about completed recommendations of these actions, it's rather we're saying that they have been embedded into the housing department's day-to-day work stream. So I am minded to also say that if we are saying that they're mostly on track as opposed to be completed as a point of it being a part of business as usual. I will touch on the broader details of the recommendations later on, but for now I'd just like to focus on what we've achieved in those 4 main projects, as I've been asked to do. I will take the documents that have been circulated as read and only highlight the things that have been flagged to me by residents and members as the most important things to them in these projects. Resident panels have been set up to ensure that we're working with residents to resolve issues that have been brought up. We have always had it in mind to recruit a clerk of works and a building surveyor to ensure that we're scrutinising the work that has been done by the contractors. On the Canada Estate, we'd hope that we would have appointed one by now, but this recruitment is still ongoing. So this work is still in train. On Devon Mansions, we do have an internal clerk of works who will be carrying out post-inspections for all internal works completed. And just to point out that the works on the Kirby Estate have been completed. There is a management action plan that addresses all of the recommendations, and those recommendations that have not been met have dates next to them when they will be delivered. And those are the points on the major works. Is it okay for me to move on to the voids, Chair? I'm just going to go through the things that I've been asked here to. Yep. On the voids, I just want to be clear that it's important to distinguish between council voids and voids in terms of the wider scale. So council voids are my responsibility, and empty homes from a wider perspective are Councillor Dennis's responsibility. That is including private sector empty homes alongside homelessness, alongside homelessness, which refers to just council stock. So empty homes in general, which includes, hers includes empty homes which are within private housing. On the empty homes in terms of the private housing, we are using compulsory purchase orders to bring them back into use, and empty dwelling management orders where possible. We have loan funding, which is helping us bring empty homes from the private sector back into use. We've got 1.8 million this financial year to support empty homes through this loan funding. We have high empty homes, of which some of them are due to estate regeneration, and this is ongoing. And also we have to acknowledge the fact that we are in central London, so they are private homes owned by different people, private landlords, different property developers as well. Some of our empty homes are also due to our new builds, which we're waiting for them to be signed off by our building surveyors, and some are awaiting demolition like Ledbury and Marie Curie. On the use of empty homes for homelessness, I just wanted to be clear about something. It's not as easy as someone who is rough sleeping to be housed into our empty homes, which may be derelict or not suitable for habitation for a number of reasons. But we are currently housing 85% of our rough sleepers in long-term properties which are appropriate for their needs. And if anyone wants to know what that looks like, I passed a cabinet report in February that details our supported housing provision. We are bringing empty homes back into use, and a lot of this is to make sure that we're housing homeless families. On the Aylesbury, we have a temporary accommodation programme where we will be turning around some of our voids, and we have 4 new void contractors that have been procured to increase the delivery of this the capacity of this team. Greyland Group is one of them, and they are responsible for voids in Peckham and Nunhead, which includes the Aylesbury estate. The current situation on the Aylesbury estate is we have a major works program to turn around our voids, and we also have our day-to-day voids. In the Taplow, we have 185 homes that we are trying to bring back into use, and this, because they are high-rise buildings, we have to take this to the building safety regulator in order to let us know how best to do this, and we are hoping to hear back in August of this year about how to go by that. In terms of the delays of bringing voids back into use, a lot of this is because they require major repairs, some of them require long-term pest control treatment, and some of them are meter issues and key exchanges. We're in the process of recruiting. The most important thing about this one is that we're in the process of recruiting a person who is supposed to be managing this from the end-to-end usage, from end-to-end process. And that basically means at the moment, our voids are sitting within different directorates. We want one person to take over it so that they're able to manage the whole system and basically ensure that the process is much more quicker than it is at the moment. I've also been asked to talk about downsizing. Our older people strategy that we passed in January, I believe, has details about incentivizing our older residents to move out of their houses to make sure that we're housing families, and essentially we'll be doing more hand-holding through this process so that we're able to house families in that, and that's more than what we've been doing in the past. And we want to make sure that people know that downsizing is still a priority when it comes to our allocation policy. Moving on to our Good Landlord plan, we are on track for delivering this plan in terms of our key themes. I'm looking forward to seeing the expansion of our resident engagement plan. Our boards have been set up, and as the year progresses, we will see our residents partnering with us in our decision-making process. We have already done this through engagement on Chiltern Grove, where we have a resident sitting on our procurement panel to appoint a contractor. So all in all, coming into this about a couple of months ago, I see that there is a commitment to our residents to show that we are doing our best, first to give them a stronger voice and to show that we are putting them first. Some of the papers that I have put out in Cabinet say that our residents are the experts of our homes, and having lived in our council housing, I always say I've always wanted a place to feel safe and to feel in control and to feel secure, and that is what I am seeing that we are in progress of doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to address the conflict of interest, well, the pecuniary interests that were mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. Now, it would seem to me that there are 2 pecuniary interests that have been mentioned. One relating to Councillor Harper. Did you mention you lived on? Did you say you lived on?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a pecuniary interest so much as I just live there, so I'm quite, the voids affect me in terms of a social.
So there's an interest.
It's not a financial interest.
Okay, it's a dispensation then.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I should have used better language. Dispensation, and there's a dispensation for you, because you live on.
Yeah. And Ina was on the previous meetings, the way we made the recommendations as well.
No, but I just want to get something correct. Yeah. I want to get something correct. So, for the last meeting where you had a dispensation, you recused yourself, correct?
In the last meeting, I was...
Because you have a dispensation. Okay, so this is what I'm going to decide, that for where there is a dispensation in both of the cases, I don't think it would be right to ask specific questions related to this item. It just feels a bit... Yes?
Well, it's just the vast majority of my constituents live on the Aylesbury estate, so if I'm unable to represent my constituents because...
Is there another Faraday Ward councillor here?
There is, but not from the same party as me.
Okay, that's fine. Officer, go ahead.
A similar issue came up at the last meeting in terms of housing associations, and the legal advice was for this meeting, in the discussion about housing associations, because we have some members who are tenants of housing association properties, if the discussion remains for that particular council or member on the general level about housing associations, the discussion is fine and they're welcome to ask questions around that area. If it moves to a specific question, in this case about housing association X, in which the councillor is a tenant, then they must recuse themselves from that part of the conversation. And we haven't had any legal dispensation for this, so I assume that the same must apply. So if you are to ask questions about voids or empty homes, I assume that is probably okay. If you are to ask about voids on the Aylesbury estate, the advice, as far as I can see, is you mustn't do that. Without dispensation from the council's legal officer, which we haven't asked for.
By the way, this is what I'm suggesting. You can go. You can feel free to stay and ask the question. However, there are legal ramifications. I'm just putting that out there. This was the legal advice we got. There are legal ramifications should there be a dispensation. Should there be a conflict in respect to a dispensation of which you choose to stay and then ask the question. I'm just putting it out there. So I'm just making you aware based on what the last legal advice we received was. I'm not going to dwell on this for too long.
I feel like we might need to clarify this. Yeah. It's going to be legal.
Right. No, I'm just...
And like no one spoke to me. I don't think I got an email about this before today.
Can I just add one more thing? It's sorry for the Commission, for the Assembly and Cabinet, the monitoring officer prepares legal advice. In this case, for the scrutiny committees, that doesn't happen, and individual members have to ask for legal advice as to their position. But the best position that we have, I mean, I can read it out for the housing association if you want, and then you could transfer the. Okay, is that okay, Chair? Yeah. Okay. If a social landlord, and then as an example is given, social housing association X was to be considered or being considered at the meeting, and the member was a tenant of that landlord, then they would have a disclosable pecuniary interest, in which case you should not be present at that part of the meeting. If, however, social landlords in general were discussed, which I think might happen in this meeting as opposed to anything specific at the last meeting, in my opinion, and this is one of the legal officers, in my opinion, then they would not have a disclosable pecuniary interest. I think that's a fairly parallel situation to the one that you've described, as far as I can tell.
Bring in two members, but we won't go on this, but I will allow members to make their own decision. Go ahead.
I think I would appreciate a point of clarification, because this is the first meeting in which I've been a council leaseholder and been on this, but I know other members of this commission and of previous commissions have been council leaseholders and have been asking questions of the council, i.e. their landlord, of things where they have had personal experience and they are then asking a question about it. But this has never been a problem before a meeting, so I don't understand why this position's changed. So if it's possible just to ask for clarification on like why this position has changed, because it seems completely new and I don't entirely understand it. Thank you.
So a few things on this. Firstly, the advice that we read about as it applies to social landlords, of which housing associations are an example, would not apply to Councillor Harper because she's not a tenant of the landlord. So that's one thing. Secondly, I think we have discussed these matters at previous scrutiny commissions, which Councillor Harper has sat on. Aylesbury Estate is the biggest estate in the borough. It's a major issue. I can imagine there being a situation where the topic of discussion was, say, compulsory purchase orders, and there being some kind of issue around that that might directly affect Councillor Harper as a leaseholder, but that's not what the discussion is about this evening. And I appreciate, Chair, you allowing members to make their own choices on this, but I think as a kind of, as a matter of kind of common sense, I suppose, it seems highly unintuitive and unlikely that there'd be a legal ramification from a councillor representing her own residents on the Scrutiny Commission in respect of the estate, which is the major issue in the ward.
Thank you. We'll proceed. We'll proceed. Yes. Do members have any questions they would like to ask on this item? Go ahead, Councillor Harper.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I just a few questions on the things that you presented on. Firstly, you said there's loan funding to bring private sector homes back into council ownership. Yeah, and you said secured a loan of, was it 1.8 million? You sure it's 1.8 million?
It's specifically 1,097,840. So if I said 1.8, it's because I'm really bad at maths. I might have not gotten it
Okay,
correct.
fine. I just thought it seemed to be a very small sum of money. And do you have any idea how many homes that would bring back into use? Yeah.
Chair, if I may, just to explain, the grant is from government, and the way it is used is to encourage landlords with empty homes to refurbish them, and they have to match fund it. So if the cost of refurbishment of a home, for example, is 25,000, the owner of that property would put forward 25,000, and we will put forward 25,000 from this fund. And when we do the works and the property is back in use, it would automatically be leased to the council.
So it's not a buyback?
No, it's not buyback.
No, okay.
It's refurbishment.
No, sorry. So you said that downsizing is still a priority, which is good. Has there been consideration of people getting band 1 when they downsize from three beds to 2 bed? You know, a lot of elderly people want an extra bed, and I just think it would free up things and move them a lot faster if we could, because currently it has to be.
Yeah, as that's a specifically detailed question, I would confer to Candida, who might have the detail on that.
Sorry, are you asking if people who are downsizing, who want to move into a smaller property, be given higher priority on the housing allocations?
Yes, at the moment, I think the rules are that to get band 1, you have to downsize to 1 bedroom. You cannot get band 1 if you downsize from 3 to 2 bedrooms.
That's not my understanding of it. I think that every case is looked at, but it's band A that people are in if they are transferred to downsize.
Can you get back to me on that then?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Just one.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, if you could just get back to me, that'd be great. Thank you. I think you talked about someone having overall control of voids from start to finish, end to end, and you said that those voids are sitting in different directorates at the moment. What specifically did you mean by that?
Yes, when we say sitting in different directorates, they're all in housing, but part of it sits with me, and part of it sits with Candida, and part of it sits with Abby.
So it's partly in repairs.
Partly in landlord services and partly in housing needs.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. I wanted to, just to check, in terms of, there's obviously a lot of different topics that we're covering. Are we okay to kind of bounce around, or I don't know if you want to structure it by report or something like that, or I'll just dive in, shall I? Okay, so I wanted to ask about voids. So just quickly, a question. The report refers to temporary accommodation voids. So it says there were 430 temporary accommodation voids, of which a large portion were on the Aylesbury. Can I just check on what it means by temporary accommodation void? Is that where the let is a temporary accommodation let, but they are vacant? Is that what that is, or does it, or not?
Because they have been identified as accommodation that will be let as temporary accommodation, or as void that will be let as temporary accommodation. So to be clear, on the Aylesbury, there are maybe 2 types of voids. Well, 3 actually. well, I'm confusing myself now. So one, there are voids that are in blocks that are going to be demolished. So they are not going to be brought back into use, but they are still counted as voids or empty homes. Yeah. And then there are voids that are going to be, that are being relet, regardless of the phase of the regeneration they're in. Yeah. So any property that becomes void on the Aylesbury is relet as temporary accommodation. And then the third type is similar to the second, but this is strictly Taplow. Taplow block had been identified for demolition and completely decanted. Well, yeah, almost completely decanted, thank you. But a decision has been made to repopulate it. And therefore, there is extensive work going on in Taplow, which Councillor Magwanje referred to earlier, because of the height of the property falls within the remit of the building safety regulator, and we're required to ask permission for works we're going to do there. So, you know, so generally, either the void is in a block that is going to be demolished and therefore will not be relet, but if it's a void that's going to be relet, then it will be used for temporary accommodation.
Okay, thanks. So just to be clear, so the void, so in all cases where it says void, that means a vacant home. So if it's currently being used for temporary accommodation and there are tenants who are temporary accommodation, tenants in there, that's not a void, that's not a temporary accommodation void.
No. If there's someone living there,
yeah.
it's not a void.
Yeah. Sorry, heads were shaking and nodding at the same time. But I think I understand. Okay, that's good to understand. So just so, and the Aylesbury, obviously, you know, it's in my ward, so I have particular interest in, but it's also relevant to the broader discussion around council home voids in the borough, because not just because a lot of them are on the Aylesbury, but also because the treatment of the voids on the Aylesbury has been different. And as the report refers to, there was a dedicated team established, partly because of the issues the Aylesbury is facing, partly because of the decision around Taplow, and partly because of the broader delays within voids. I just wanted to ask on this for a second. So the report mentions that the void service established a dedicated team for the Aylesbury estate. Now, my understanding is that it was the team that has been dedicated to doing the voids on the Aylesbury is separate to the void service, then that it was something that was done through Southwark Construction as a part of the regeneration effort. And the reason that I ask about that is because for the purposes of this commission, understanding, you know, how well the service is improving and how, you know, what recommendations we might make around it, it's about identifying where we are talking about broader improvements in how Southwark does its voids, and where we are saying that there, you know, basically something outside the norm was done specifically on the Aylesbury for a specific circumstance that might not then, you know, affect how the service is done more broadly across the borough. So I suppose the question is that right? Is my understanding correct there, that it wasn't really, that the dedicated efforts on the Aylesbury around voids have been done outside the void service and been sort of organised in a different way through Southwark Construction? And if so, you know, how, it would be good to understand how that has informed the broader attempts to turn around voids across the borough, whether there are decisions taken about resourcing or, you know, the organisation of those efforts based on what's happened on the Aylesbury. I suppose I should say that I'm referring to page 32 of the supplementary agenda.
I can start it off and Ryan can add to it. First thing to say is that, you know, I think it was Councillor Harper that referred to Aylesbury being, or maybe yourself actually, the largest estate in the borough. So, you know, all of the voids are literally in one area. So it makes sense to have a team dedicated to doing voids there, as opposed to the rest of the borough, where, you know, voids come up, you know, randomly everywhere else. So that's one. Two, Southwark Construction, I instructed them to bring back, to review the possibility of bringing back Taplow. And that meant employing a contractor to do an investigation and to do a trial, to get information that we would need to do the rest of it. But the actual team currently of people doing voids on the Aylesbury are our own colleagues in the DLO. Yeah. However, as Councillor Magwanje said in our introduction, we have recently appointed 4 contractors, one of whom happened to be the same contractor that Southwark Construction instructed to do the original review. And you know, also conveniently, Coincidentally, they've been appointed for that area. So not only are they going to be doing tap load, they're going to be doing other voids on the estate. But the team, the DLO team that are doing voids will continue to do so, because we need all hands on deck on the Aylesbury. Ryan, is there anything you want to add to that?
Not really. Just you spoke about learning lessons from the Aylesbury. I think we're learning lessons from all of our voids, and one of the lessons we're learning is at the moment we have the void works go out to many different teams and many different contractors. So we've got contractors doing electrical work, contractors doing building work, internal teams doing pest control, and energy meters and stuff like that. So what we intend to do with the 4 new contractors is get those contractors to concentrate on the whole void, and we think that's going to reduce the delays in turning around voids.
Thanks. Just quickly, that was helpful. Just to understand, like the hiring of additional contractors. I guess this is through Plentific, part of that thing. Or
4 contractors?
Yes, yeah.
No, they're not through Plentific. They were procured specifically as voice contractors.
Okay. Does this reflect a broader investment that the council is making in putting additional resources towards voids in general, or is this only to for the particularities of the Aylesbury estate? Is it something where once that work has been accomplished and Taplow is returned to use, that's the job that's done, or is it there's a broader strategy that means we need more people working on voids to increase the turnaround times?
Okay, so the procurement of those voice contractors was on a framework without guaranteed work. Yeah. It is to provide support, because the primary objective is to use our own DLO to do our voids. But we have a high number of voids at the moment, and we're a large landlord. We will always have a large number of voids. So we want to build our own internal team to be able to do those voids, because that's the cheapest way of doing them. But there are times that we would need external support, which is why we've procured these contractors. However, at the moment, particularly because of what we want to do in Taplow and the number of voids on the Aylesbury, it is convenient that that we have those 4 contractors in addition to our DLO team at present.
Thank you. Yes.
Chair, can I just come in? And just to be clear, I know that we're trying to focus our minds on the Aylesbury, but we're dealing with, and when we're speaking specifically about council voids, this is so that we are able to turn around our voids service much quicker. So it's not just a concentration of that. So I just want to reiterate, we are, and it says it in our better repairs paper, we want to make sure that we're using 90% of our workforce to do our work on our homes and only bring in contractors when it's desperately needed, this is the specific desperately needed situation that we have, but this is for a larger strategy to make sure that we are turning around homes and housing families much quicker.
Thank you. Councillor Tester.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to sort of make one kind of point of clarification, which is just on the update report on the Canada Estate, Fair Street, Kirby Estate. Just as a point, I've raised it with Adam as well, but the very front cover sheet of that says that the ward's effective on Rotherhithe and London Bridge, West Bermondsey, but it also should have North Bermondsey in there, because obviously Kirby Estate was historically in Rotherhithe, but it is now in North Bermondsey. So that's been an issue at a previous meeting as well, so I just wanted to make that point of clarification. In terms of the empty homes report, there's I feel like it's almost kind of death by table. There's quite a lot of sort of numbers and figures to get your head around, but I was wondering, do we have any kind of benchmarking of that kind of void level versus other kind of large local authority landlords in the sort of sense of how we're kind of doing on that? And I appreciate obviously there are large numbers of those where they are kind of affected by regeneration projects, but I think particularly when you're looking at those active void numbers, is there a bit of benchmarking as to how we are against other local authorities?
Yes, there are the government live tables, which we've put a few, and we've referred to in the report, and we've put a few of them in there which show us against other London boroughs, for example. Do you mean the number of?
So so that's the total number of voids. I'm talking specifically about the council-owned ones. That's the total number. That there's a comparator. There isn't one where it's actually just looking at those, not including the private rental sector ones.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes, it does. The tables do. Break down by tenure. Well, they actually no, they don't. They break down by classification, and the way that they classify council-owned voids could be voids where the council acts as the landlord, but doesn't necessarily own the voids. So that's why sometimes there's a discrepancy between the numbers that we are reporting as our own stock voids and ones that we manage. But it does make a differentiation between council voids and private sector voids within the reporting.
I do not dare to speak for Councillor Tester, but I think what we do need to bring back, what I'm hearing is you want to understand where we are in terms of council housing voids in comparison to other local authorities, the specific number, so I think we can bring that back. Or if you have the specific number, that would be great.
I don't have the specific number, but what I will tell you is this, and you can work out a specific number from it. The benchmark for voids in relation to your stock number is 1%. Yeah. So a landlord doing well should not have more than 1% of his properties void. We currently have about 2%. So our aim is to have that, in effect.
Just a question on the 1%. 1% is desirable because
you will always have voids. As a landlord, you will always have voids. You know, you will never have. If you own 5 properties, you could have all of them occupied. But if you have thousands of properties, inevitably, for one reason or the other, some of them will be empty, and they will be being worked on to be relet at any one time.
Can you tell me more about the time frame, the desirability around the time frame? So you mentioned the desirability of having 1% of voids and no more. We're currently at 2%. In terms of the period of time that a property is void for when we hold the 1%, what is a respectable time period? 6 months, 10 months?
I also happen to be fresh on that one, because it's 40 days. Yes, for minor voids, and if you have a question of what minor is, Ryan will explain it in a minute, and 90 for major voids.
So you tell us what minor and major means.
So mine is basically not replacing any major components, so no new kitchens, no new bathrooms, no structural issues, no roof repairs, that kind of thing. And that would sit in the major. So if there's roof repairs, kitchen and bathroom replacements, kitchen or bathroom replacements, or structural issues, that would be a major.
Okay. So I think what's kind of driving my question is, so you mentioned the 40-day turnaround for minor, is that correct? And then roughly
40-day is the median in London at the moment.
Okay, I'm talking about our own. I think my question is angling more around our own aspirations and the extent to which they're realistic or not, and to the extent that the lack of realistic expectations that we're setting for residents leads us to maybe probably thinking of revising those figures should we need to, because if on average it's our target or the medium in London is 40 days, but at the point that we're at 1%, it's realistically taking us about 60 days to address minor voids, and for the longer term voids, it's yes, the medium is 90, but it's actually taking us 110 or 120 days. Should we be rethinking what numbers we place on minor and longer term voids, just so that the expectations of residents can be better managed at the point that the voids issue is controlled and we're at 1%? Do you catch the drift of my question?
admit I don't think I do. But you know,
If you don't understand it, do you want me to clarify it so that you can?
yes.
Okay, so go ahead, Councillor.
What I was going to say before we go into the detail of it, I mean, if we're looking at what the stage that we're at the moment, and we're trying to hire someone to manage this whole situation, we have the largest housing stock. So yes, some might look at it and think, bit of a big, job, and it depends on how long that recruitment process takes, and where we're trying to be at the end of the year. If at the end of the year we're trying to do major voids by 90 days and 40 days for our minor voids, and we haven't done that recruitment, I think it is fair to say that we should be reviewing it in the middle of the year to see where we can be. So setting a target now in the efforts that we're trying to recruit by maybe March or April, I think it's fair to review it in about 6 months' time and readjusting that figure to suit what our current circumstances are. That's what I would say to the question that you...
Thanks, that's helpful, because what my thinking on this is, because we're going to make recommendations at some point in this meeting, is should we be in an ideal position where we've hired that one person, we've brought down the level from being 2% voids to 1%, but we're still not hitting the targets around 40 days and 90 days. Should we actually be rethinking the numbers that we put on those properties for which they should be turned around? Because to the public, once that one person's in place, we have 1% stock, they think, well, what's the delay? Why are we not reaching those targets? So my question comes from that perspective, but I think you've clarified the point well. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. First thing is about time that you had voids. So it's about time that you had all the voids under one roof, because it was costing you a packet. And I want you to clarify the first thing about Aylesbury. Taking that action about temporary accommodation, using them as void, how much of a value for money is that, or is it not value for money at all? Could you share any light on that?
So when I said to first about instructing Southwark Construction to do the review, that included whether it would be value for money to spend the money, refurbishing those properties, knowing that eventually Taplow will be demolished, and therefore working out from how much it's going to cost to refurbish them, how much rent we will collect in between then and the time it becomes it's needed to be demolished, and it worked out as value for money. And we need to bear in mind that this is, value for money in this case is not always cash, because by refurbishing Taplow, we will be able to bring people who are currently in temporary accommodation elsewhere, including outside of the borough, for example, or in more expensive accommodation, into the Taplow. Not all of them, but it gives us the opportunity to be able to do so.
On my second question, so this deals with talking about medium point, right? So I don't think it's fair for you just to say medium point without telling us what the statutory target is actually, because that's what we should be aiming for. Because based on the chair's questioning, if we are going to be moving towards the 1%, that will help you develop a strategy to get to the 1% or below the 1%. Because you did mention the statutory target in the report.
Okay, so we would not have described them as statutory targets, because there are no statutory targets for voids. There are ideal targets. But where we are, members of the commission would know me and my frankness. The reality is, we're not good. We're actually poor at dealing with voids, and that is why we are where we are. And we are making those changes. Colleagues on the table are driving these changes, and it gives me confidence that we will be better. But at the moment, that being better means to aim for being median. being median obviously means, that at least we're at par with the majority of people across London. And then we can aspire to join the people who are at the top of, managing their voice, because they do it lower, Councillor Cherry, than 40 days. So it can be done quicker. But from where we are, yes, and colleagues will know that when I set the target, it's stupid to set an unreasonable target from where we are. So achieving median by the end of the next financial year is a reasonable target considering where we are at the moment, and the impact of what that would have on people who are on the waiting list, tenants who want to move, people who are in temporary accommodation, people who are in temporary accommodation where we pay a day rate, and the income that we will get from that. All of those things will be massive. So ideally we want to be performing at the top, but where we are at the moment, it is reasonable that we aim to be median first.
So my question first. Steve, I thought Southwark aims to be the industry leader, not, so I think we need to set the benchmark, as somebody referred to. Maybe that's what we should be aiming for, rather than, so.
Just to add to what Hakeem was saying, and to emphasize the point that, so I did say in my introduction where we would like to be, because again, we don't have a statutory requirement. And yes, you are absolutely right, Andrew, that we are industry leaders in a lot of things. And because we're industry leaders in house building, that also means that we have a lot of housing stock. So going back to the point that I made about our Better Repairs program, was the idea that we're trying to use 90% of our own organisation to actually do the repairs, to do void turnarounds, to take care of our homes, right? And that means making sure that we are distributing our resources accordingly and realistically. So if we want to set a target that is at a point that meets every other local authority, that is unrealistic because of the housing stock that we have. So we need to set a target that meets that considers how many homes we have, and then improve on that once we ensure that we have the talent within our direct labour force, and also that we are able to manage our housing revenue account accordingly. So these are all of the things that we need to consider when we're setting our targets. So I just wanted to be clear about that.
Thank you, Councillor Harper, then Councillor Tester. Thank you.
Thank you. I've actually got 3 slightly different questions, but they're all about voids. So the first one, in terms of the new director, I'm just struggling to, I'm sorry, I know you've kind of explained already and I might just be missing it, but they won't have any teams directly reporting under them. So how will they be able to kind of get the resources from the other teams to kind of complete the work they need to do? That's my first question. My second question was kind of following on from Andrew's point around value for money, but less so value for money, but more in terms of where there is a decision that it is value for money to redo a property to let as temporary accommodation, use a temporary accommodation. At what point do we actually say this could be a permanent let? Because in those instances, when that calculation's been made, obviously the understanding of that building will be there for a long time. I'm imagining around 5 years. And so for me, and I think lots of families with children, 5 years is no longer temporary accommodation. That we would be wanting people to be in a home if they were going to be living somewhere for 5 years. We don't want people to think of that as temporary. So that's kind of the other question, is like, at what point do we actually say this, even though it's not going to be there forever, this should be a permanent let we're offering this person, so they've got that kind of longer term security. And then my third question was actually just about Pontific. And again, I'm sorry, I know you talked about the kind of different contractors, but I'm struggling to understand how Pontific fits into the picture in terms of contractors for filling voids. Thank you. Sorry, those are 3 quite different questions.
I just wanted to clarify your second question. Is it about specifically Aylesbury, or are you talking about voids in general?
It's definitely not specific to the Aylesbury.
Okay. So voids in general, we are turning voids around to give permanent homes, and I think I've gotten that from Candida, who is leading on that service, but I just wanted to be clear that we are talking about general voids, not just that.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, if we're talking about general voids, then apart from the Aylesbury, all other voids are refurbished to be let as secure tenants.
Sorry, I would say voids which are on footprints which are going to be demolished at some point or planned for
Yeah, so
yeah.
yes, so I thought I understood your question to be that until you clarified it. But there are not issues. There are requirements around secure tenancies. So if we're going to let a property as secure tenancy, then it has to be let through the allocations policy. We have to advertise it, people bid for it, and therefore it would not be the same people who we need to home on those estates currently. So we need to bear that in mind. If we change tact, and it is not impossible, but if we change tact, then we are reletting those homes to a completely different set of people, just to be clear. However, there is also a need for temporary accommodation. And I know that people can have in their minds about, you know, where they're living is temporary. But one of the decisions Cabinet made recently is that tenants who live in temporary accommodation should be treated in exactly the same way as people who live in secure tenancy. So we're giving them exactly the same service, even though they may have a different type of tenancy agreement. Just wanted to be clear about that. On your first question, we're not employing a new director, we're employing a voids manager.
Sorry.
Yes, who will have staff. They will have staff, dedicated staff, but they would also have control over staff elsewhere who have anything to do with voids, because they would have responsibility and accountability for voids from cradle to grave. And on Plentific, on the Aylesbury, as I said earlier, we're using one contractor and our DLO. And the idea of using our DLO is to continue to build the DLO to expand so that they can do all voids. But at the moment, we have an exceptionally high number of voids, so it's all hands on deck. So we've appointed the 4 contractors. We've only just appointed them, and they are in mobilization. So it will take time for them to get set. In the meantime, our voids team in the DLO are doing voids. And in addition to that, we're getting some contractors from Plentific to do voids. If you want to expand on.
So we've just started a pilot on Plentific, where we've put maybe about 11 voids on there. And Plentific is a marketplace where we go out to the marketplace, a bit like Checker Trade, and we can choose a void. They get to quote for the void. We give them a specification. They quote the price. They'll have reviews on this, so we'll know how good they are, how they've been rated by previous customers, and then we'll make a choice of who we give that work to. Yep.
Councillor Tester.
Sorry, I guess my point was, it was like, yes, whether or not these properties which were being allocated for temporary accommodation should be put in open to, like, for people to bid for who are on the council waiting list. Just to clarify, thank you.
Councillor Tester.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, but I'll do one of them now and I'll maybe do another one later. I kind of appreciate on this 70 homes plan, it's very kind of like in the here and now and kind of like trying to deal with this immediate sort of issue of kind of wanting to get back to that kind of benchmark level. But I was wondering if there is any sort of kind of plan moving forward, because obviously one of the things that does take a while to sometimes turn around more complex voids is kind of the need obviously to hit decent home standard, things like that, and obviously we know we've got a new decent home standard admittedly with an implementation of about 9 years away, but also minimum energy efficiency standards coming in as well. Like, is there a sort of a plan to kind of enhance the team to deal with that kind of upcoming regulation as well?
Yes, there is, but the focus at the moment is just to close down as many voids as we can. We are doing a stock condition survey, as you'll be aware, at the moment, and as a result of that stock condition survey, we'll put together an asset management strategy, and then that's just about how we're going to deliver those energy efficient works in future. So some of that might be when properties become void, and some of that might be new programs.
Councillor Vostell.
Thanks, Chair. Still on voids. I think, and I was sort of prompted to think about this when you were saying, Hakeem, about the relatively poor standard of our void turnarounds to date. I mean, I think it is worth noting that the Empty Homes Action Plan, which was originally drawn up in October 2021, definitely can't be considered to have been a success so far. I mean, if you look at, for example, point 8 in the report, which kind of charts out the trajectory of our empty homes, obviously that includes the private rented and other kinds of tenures, not just council homes. The implementation of a plan to reduce empty homes doesn't seem to have led to any change that's positive overall. I mean, 1 year of dropping, and then otherwise, largely they've been increasing. And I think it would be good, because the reason that I was sort of probing a bit at this question about, additional resources to address a particular issue versus, the long-term lessons or what the overall strategy is just to understand how, given that, appreciating that, if you've not or been here for the entirety of the time this plan has been in place, appreciating that it doesn't seem to be working that well, or hasn't up to this point, what the changes in the management of voids kind of strategically, let's say, rather than just the kind of additional resourcing being provided to deal with a backlog, because that is very good to do, and I support that, and I think that's a good thing to do. But in terms of over the long term, obviously we want to see that the council's service in general works, rather than something that has to be bolstered by the introduction of special measures in order to kind of bring backlogs down. The report refers a bit to streamlining processes and systems and so on, but it would be good to understand maybe in a bit more detail what the strategic changes are, and whether the view is that the bulk of the issue is resourcing, and that greater resourcing is the answer.
Yep, Councillor Mwanganji.
I do apologise if that's not in the paper, but Councillor Foster, I think I've said this, that we are trying to make sure that this is a strategic approach as well as dealing with an immediate issue. I have asked the Commission to come back with I think the team and I have I've asked to come back with a wider plan about how we're going to be dealing with voids once we have the proper resources, or once we have the new resources in place, so that we can relay back to the Commission and to our residents how we're going to be dealing with the council service of turning around our void system. But at the moment, what we are trying to do is to put in place a strategic plan on how to deal with voids, even though it might seem that we are concentrating on trying to get rid of the large backlog that we do have, but it is a learning process that we're trying to put in place so that we can make it better. I hope I have made that clear, and I'm sorry that it hasn't actually gone into the papers.
Yes.
If I may, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Foster, for that. Voice turnaround is a simple matter, and then you think, well, if it's a simple matter, why aren't you getting it right? And the reason we're not getting it right is because we overcomplicate it. Yeah, every landlord in the country deal with voids, and following what Andrew Oki said earlier, there was a time before COVID that this borough led the way on voice turnaround. And the reason they were able to do that at that time is because it was under a single person responsible for it from start to finish. And somebody decided to change that. So there's no need to overcomplicate voids. My job is to strategize. But voids are so simple that if you just make sure that you don't drop the button, and you'll be fine, in truth. And that's where we need to get to, and that person is going to be in Ryan's area. What we cannot change is where actions in voice need to take place. So the letting of a new home has to happen in Candida's area. The closing of an initial tenancy has to happen in Abby's area. And the repair work, the refurbishment works in a voice has to happen in Ryan's area. But if they're happening individually, then that's where we have the problem. But if it's coordinated from one source, it should be all right. And that's where we're hoping to get to.
Good. We'll, we're going to give about 5 or 7 minutes more to this item. I'm conscious there are other areas such as the QHIP, the Good Landlord Plan, which we haven't asked questions on, but Councillor Katie Harper.
Well, it was just kind of on that point about it should be being simple, but then I guess in terms of the reletting or voids on kind of doomed estates or doomed to be demolished, you do then have potentially a risk where things do become more complicated in identifying when a void appears, because, you know, there's faster turnaround. Sometimes like keys get lost. That's when you see kind of squatters moving in, and that's like certainly, as the report notes, there's been a task force established on the Aylesbury to deal with those kind of issues where it has moved away from just housing, but it's become like a kind of crime, antisocial behaviour issue. And I guess I'm maybe more noting, but that is an additional area of complication, which when you have more like potentially choosing to have temporary accommodation over council tenancies, that increases that risk or like complication. I don't know if that's something anybody can speak on.
So I think I would just like to be clear that temporary accommodation in a lot of ways is a misnomer, because obviously the way things have happened over years means that waiting, you know, the number of people on waiting lists and the amount of permanent properties that are available has really become a huge disparity. So people are in temporary accommodation for a long time. It's called temporary, but it isn't. So we usually make a difference between what we call emergency accommodation, which might be where we first put somebody, that might be nightly booked accommodation, and sort of longer term temporary accommodation. So these council estate voids that we use for temporary accommodation, the people that are in there are intended to be in there for a long time. They're not intended to be moved on quickly or whatever. It is a form of settled accommodation for them.
Last question on voids from Councillor Foster.
Thanks. Appreciate that we have more stuff to get through. I do think there's an important question here, and it's probably getting into more of a political question, I suppose, an operational one, about the temporary accommodation. The kind of long periods that people spend in it is a reflection of the housing crisis. It's not a kind of reflection of what it is as a type of tenure, if you like. And I completely appreciate the desire to treat them no different than council tenants, but obviously they are different in the sense that they don't have a secure tenancy. So it is not as good a position to be in, clearly. And all of the accommodation in Taplow or elsewhere, where we have used what used to be council homes and we relet them as temporary accommodation, those are all losses of council tenancy. So there is a drawback to this approach. And I'm not sure I agree with Hakeem saying that they're a completely different group of people. I don't. I think that it's an important question, and it might feed into the recommendations that this commission makes. That and it gets back to what Councillor Harper's question was, which was kind of putting the point about, Taplow, which is set for demolition, yes, but obviously there are many delays on the region of the Aylesbury that we're very aware of. So, if something is stretching into the long distance, is it really the right thing to do for those people to be living there in insecure tenancies rather than secure tenancies, which is obviously what the block was constructed for when it isn't set for demolition? There is a judgment to be made about if it's going to be, demolished a long way into the future, whether the people that we put there deserve to have secure tenancies because that's better for them. That's something that we would want to do. Obviously, the desire is that homes will be permanent and not temporary.
Sorry, what's your question?
I guess my question is if you can address perhaps that strategic question, and maybe it's a question for Councillor Manganche, about the whether it's the case that in Taplow or kind of more generally for blocks that are set for demolition where it is not clear that it will happen soon for whatever reason, whether they should be secure tenancies because that is in fact a better type of tenancy, and it's better for the residents who live there.
So I'm going to caveat this with saying It's my third month out here. And I'm going to answer it by saying this sounds like an issue of the management of our housing revenue account. If we have houses that we are going to have longer term, that basically puts a strain on our housing revenue account, which is the reason why we've had to be in a position of selling land so that we are able to have those resources, but then still also provide social housing that is adequate for our residents. So I will stick to the idea that we need to make sure that we're managing our housing revenue account accordingly, to make sure that we are managing our stock for our existing residents, which is a very, very big responsibility that we've been given, and something that they have made clear that is their focus. They want our housing revenue account to focus on the repairs of our current stock. So I wouldn't want to strain it by saying something in this commission that might jeopardize that.
If I could just add to that slightly on two things. One is that as a responsible landlord, we have a responsibility to people to whom we let homes, and I think it's disingenuous to let a home on a secure tenancy to someone, knowing that home is likely to be demolished in 5 years. That's no security if the home is going to be demolished. Because I think when I said that whether you have a temporary accommodation tenure or you have a secure tenure, as far as the council is concerned, you're a council tenant, and you will be treated as a council tenant in exactly the same way. And therefore, if we need to move people away from a block, whether they have a secure tenancy or they have a temporary accommodation tenancy, we will treat them at par. They will have exactly the same opportunities. So by being in temporary accommodation, they're not losing anything. But I wouldn't want to be in a position where I am letting a home to someone permanently, knowing that same home is going to be demolished in a few years.
So just to speak to Councillor Foster's point, which I want you to know that I do acknowledge what you're saying, because it is about how the market views those tenancies and whether or not they're able to get the same opportunities out there. It is important for Hakeem to note that we are treating them exactly the same, but it's also important to highlight, I think, the point that you're trying to make, which is the fact that in the market they are put at a disadvantage because of what they might be able to receive, whether through funds, whether through jobs, whether through just long-term understanding of where they're going to be. But I just want to be very clear, and I hope that I've answered the question in the beginning. This is a question of what we're going to be able to use our housing revenue account resources on, and the responsibility that we have to existing residents, but also taking into account what we are doing to try and support a very, very heavy housing crisis, which the rest of the country are dealing with, not just us, but we are doing our best to make sure that people are not on the streets, they're not couch surfing, they're not, for as long as we can house them, we are doing the best that we can with the resources that we have been given.
So there are areas that we haven't covered today, principally Fair Street, Devon Mansions, Canada, Kirby Estate, the QHIP Major Works Programme, which is a very important topic because, not least, I think we spent a whole meeting on this where we had various residents give evidence, and we conducted an independent report on it. I'd just like to thank the officers for the detailed response that they've given and the framework through which we're working through the recommendations that were made by this commission that were accepted by Cabinet. Just in some of the recommendations, just in some of the points in the programme that you've noted here, some are marked as completed, but I think Councillor Moran-Gandhi, you prefaced that by saying though it's marked as completed, it doesn't necessarily mean it's completed. It's just that it's a part of the work programme that's now underway. Some have dates by which certain things will be addressed by, others don't. For the ones that have dates, how well are we tracking against those in achieving the desired outcome for them?
Thank you for the question. One of the recommendations actually came from, I think it was from this meeting actually, was that we didn't lose sight of the recommendations that were made over a longer term period, so that they didn't just get it noted and then dismissed and nobody ever thinks about them again until we have another problem. And what we've done actually, we set up a register of those recommendations so we can track them, which meeting was agreed at, who agreed it, who's responsible for it, and a progress update of how we're progressing those particular recommendations. So there is a live document that we are using now to track how we're doing with those recommendations, though they've been implemented and though they're still to be implemented. So that document is in place, and we at some future meeting we will share that with the members so you can see for yourself how it works and how we track those.
Great. There are target dates on certain ones, so recommendation 28 as an example. And also recommendation, I don't know, for example, 23 and 25, 22. Some have revised dates around the works that have begun, and for whatever reason, those revised dates indicate when they'll be completed by. Are those realistic?
In terms of the dates that were in there, they were certainly realistic at the time. We are making progress, as we said earlier, we are making progress with all of these. The Devon Mansions one that these are particularly relating to has been a huge task for us, because one of the key things you'll recall from the task and finishing team's report was that we had a lot of information to go through. We've had a huge information dump of work logs, of timesheets, of works that have been done on the block, and we have a QS who's working almost full time on that. So it's quite a task to get to the bottom of where we need to get to the bottom of. So taking number 23 for example, target date of the 31st of the 3rd. The block 4 Devon Mansions is something we've actually got some work to do on, and we're starting that work with a meeting tomorrow to start the work the following week. So the target dates that we're given are realistic. If they suddenly become unrealistic, then we put a revised date to just see that. I think recommendation 25 has it was a target date of November, but because of the information that we're dealing with is so significant and huge, we've had to revise that to a more realistic target. But we do give an explanation. I do give an explanation as to why that target is revised.
And just the final one for me on this: are residents being kept abreast about the scheduled time, date, anticipated date of finish, revisions to dates?
Where we are residents are directly involved, so we're working in their premises, then we will be given advance notification of the works being carried out.
Sorry, can you repeat that, please?
Excuse me?
Can you repeat that, please? I didn't hear that.
Can you repeat?
So yes, of course I can. Forgive me, my ears don't work very well in this situation. What we've done at Devon Mansion, we sent a newsletter out in October, November time, which set out all of the recommendations that were made and how we were progressing against them and the targets for them. We will use the next version of the newsletter to update that in terms of targets that have been met, targets that may have slipped, and the reasons why they may have slipped. So that's the main avenue for the newsletter. We have also we are a new residents meeting to plan for the next 3 or 4 weeks. We'll be setting a residents meeting where we invite residents from across the First Street Devon Mansions estate to come along and talk to us about how we're progressing. So there's various ways in which we are communicating with residents. Specific works on Block 4, for example, when those works are being done, we'll let the residents know in Block 4 what we're doing, when we're coming, and how long it will take when we're complete, etc.
Councillors, but I just really need to clarify at this point. So the last newsletter was sent in October to residents of when dates, of when, I guess, works will be completed by. There have been revisions to these dates since, and those newsletters been sent, or no correspondence been sent. How are they meant to know?
As I said, because the information we've had to go through, we haven't really had much to update residents on since the letter that went out in October, but we have made much more progress recently, so the newsletter that will go out in the next couple of weeks will include that information. As I said, it will set out what the original date was, why we never met it, and what we're doing about the revised date and what we're doing to make sure that we can achieve that.
Sounds like a recommendation for us to make.
Thank you, Chair. so it's quite eye-watering findings in this report, or rather in the TFT report, of which this is, summarising the findings of. I want to ask about one of them, and this kind of gets to what Councillor Autry was asking in terms of the targets. So recommendation 8 is around the incentives for consultants. This is something that was raised repeatedly by residents. We heard this in multiple meetings, and something they've been saying for a very long time, and it must be a vindication for them to see that has been found to be the case by TFT as well. The sort of response here is that the incentivization is not straightforward and will require further research, which kind of suggests to me that there's more to come in terms of even what the target is. But there is a target date of the end of this month, so, but it's not clear to me based on that what would even have occurred by the end of the month. So perhaps it would be good to get a bit more clarity on what the council is attempting to do in response to this recommendation and what will have happened by the end of the month.
What has happened in terms of that recommendation, and I think we've reported this previously, is that the current contracts that we are out either to tender or we're currently managing include a comprehensive suite of KPIs that consultants have to comply with. So we're managing the performance of our consultants in a much more direct way. We're setting KPI targets at the beginning of the contract with those consultants, and we manage and monitor them against those KPIs. Slightly different in incentivisation. What the Technical Finishing Team report meant by incentivisation was, when the report was done at the time, there was no incentive whatsoever for consultants to bring costs down, manage costs to make sure there's no excessive increases in costs. And what we've done by introducing those KPIs is to start to be able to influence those kind of things to make sure that the consultants do have their own KPIs. We were setting KPIs for the contractors who were doing the work, but our consultants they had no KPIs to conform to. So we changed that, bringing in specific KPIs around performance, around targets set around budget, making sure that the contracts are still on budget, the works are still on budget, completion of the works, because some of the complaints, some of the issues around that we're finding with the TFT were around delays in completing the work. So those sorts of things are reflected in the suite of KPIs, so there is much more control over the consultants than probably was in the past.
So I appreciate that. That's sort of detailed a little bit in under the previous recommendation 7, where it talks about KPIs. So it's good to see that these extra controls are being introduced. Specifically on incentivization, though, the issue there being that consultancy fees increased along with the total cost of the works. So what is being done to address that in particular? And I mean, there is a target date here of the end of this month, so it'd just be good to understand what it was that was being targeted to be completed. I mean, just based on reading it, it's not totally clear what would be done and what is targeted to being done. So what will be completed by the 31st of March?
It was very simple, Councillor Foster, and I think Paul mentioned it, but it may not have been clear. I accept. When we procure consultants now, they are not paid a percentage of the contract. They are paid a fee, and therefore, whether the contract fee goes up or goes down, it doesn't affect their pay. I've said this before, Chair, at this commission. A lot has changed. These issues around Devon Mansions, Kirby Estate, and Canada Estate happened 4 or 5 years ago. A lot has moved on since then, and we operate in a completely different way. We have procured many contracts, many consultancies since then, and we have come to the Commission to demonstrate, using as an example, how we now manage contracts. So I mean, we've accepted, that what happened on those estates is not great. The reports, make that clear. But I want to assure the Commission that we are very, very far from that place now.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask about recommendation 21, partly because there isn't a revised date and the target date's been missed on this. I think there is just something missing off of that point, but also to kind of talk a little bit about the kind of the sort of management response element of it, because to me the kind of the recommendation is sort of on to both sides, and it kind of speaks to a kind of fundamental distrust, I think, between residents and the officers that kind of came about. And the response of kind of being, well, a code of conduct is going to be developed for TRA seems a bit unusual to me. I don't disagree that having a code of conduct, like a model code of conduct, is a bad idea. I think it's a good idea, but it doesn't seem to me to kind of get to the heart of like that distrust that kind of clearly developed. And I think, you know, kind of I was sort of struck by the point around, well, we didn't write to residents because there wasn't anything to update. To me, that sort of seems like, well, how do you develop that trust if you're not hitting those kind of deadlines? And, you know, I worked in resident comms for quite a long time, and one of the things that we kind of always, I sort of always try to implement as well, even if we don't have anything to update, we should still update people on a regular basis to say that there isn't anything to update, because at least you're kind of having that kind of regular back and forwards and kind of interaction with people rather than kind of leaving people in the dark. So I was just wondering if I could have a bit of a comment on that.
Thanks for your question, Councillor Tester. I agree with you, actually, and it is about communication, and we should be better at communication, and I think the plan was to send out a newsletter more regularly. But just to let you know, and I think I've been at the Commission before and spoken about what work we're doing on Consort Estate and how we've actually changed our whole approach, where we are having regular meetings with residents, all residents, leaseholders and tenants, and if there are any changes, we are meeting them and we're advising them of those changes. So we have learnt from that, but we do need to keep in touch with our residents on these estates.
Thanks. Sorry.
Can I just actually have a response on the specific point about what the revised date is on that, because it's missing?
So we'll have to update on the revised date, because this is a deep dive already into the relationship between residents and officers. Yeah, so we'll update on that date soon.
Ina's phone.
Oh.
In this phone.
Just everywhere.
I'm sure she won't mind.
Yeah, but on just before I bring in Andrew and then Councillor Hargrove, I think just in the point of comms that Councillor Tester mentions, we're more than capable of doing good comms, and we've seen it in places like Sow Gardens where they're updated very frequently. In this case, we're holding ourselves to high standards, so more frequent comms is certainly needed, and I'm sure that will form one of our recommendations, if not more. Andrew.
So I'll start with the recommendation 21. Yeah, so one of the challenges I find with some of your officers is that when they're trying to communicate, they don't actually plan to include prevention in their strategy. You already have the principle of engagement, you already have putting residents first, you already have all these other policies. So what seems to not happen is that nobody includes co-designing when you're starting out in terms of reference and the way you go forward. Because with all the best intention in the world, there's going to be turnover, staff-wise, membership, everybody. So it's already happened somewhere. I'm sure you can guess where, because we don't have these problems. And that's why I'm surprised to hear a lot about these challenges you're facing. Because before we did the manifesto on the testing, you know, that's the first exercise we carried out, both for the major works and for the regeneration. Okay, so because when you're talking about your good landlord plan, part of the bullet points that you want to achieve is good customer experience. And that is included in that. So you have to plan to include that, because otherwise you would always hit a roadblock. Yeah. You understand? So if I may suggest,
Sorry,
After the Quality Act.
Andrew,
Sorry.
what's your question? Sorry.
So we have got clerk of works, but we are in the process of putting together a reorganisation, which will mean that we've got proper qualified clerks of works to actually deliver these works and oversee them.
Thank you, Councillor Hargrove.
Thank you, Chair. Really appreciate this report. It was a very harrowing scrutiny commission when these estates came and we found out, what had been going wrong over a period of time, and it's good to see how these are being, these things, recommendations we made are being tracked. And my question is, just to get my better understanding of it for myself, is that consultants are now paid fees instead of a percentage of the contract. That's so that there's no incentive for them to let the contract go on longer than need be.
Correct.
Yeah.
So when we procure consultants now, we procure them on a fee, and that's the fee they get.
Okay, that makes sense.
Just on that question, if the consultant hasn't done a good job, are there clawback mechanisms?
So that's another thing we do for all contracts, whether they're consultancies or contractors. There are KPIs, as Paul said, and there are penalties for not achieving those KPIs.
Okay, thank you. I guess on the good landlord plan, I only had one question. I'm not sure if other members have any questions, but the resident engagement strategy, how are we developing on that? Is the first one. The second one was the stock condition survey. I think by March we had an idea of, I can't remember the specific figure, but I know March was 20%. How are we tracking against that?
So on the 2nd of February, we did the launching of all the boards. We've commissioned a training provider to ensure that they're properly trained for the work ahead. We're doing really well in terms of the comms plan for resident, because you should be aware that we send regular communications to resident. In terms of the other requirement around publishing our performance, end of the year we're going to be doing that. A lot of ongoing work with our TROs to ensure that they're compliant. We're establishing more and strengthening some of the other ones that we have. There's still a lot of work to do. We are developing a resident-friendly version of the strategy so that we can publish it, and that will encourage more residents to be part of the focus groups. We're doing a lot of work around reviewing our processes and procedures, and for everything we do now, we ensure that we have a focus group of residents who give us feedback. which we implement, and we go back to them to close the feedback loop, which is one of the things that resident told us was lacking previously. So we go back to them to let them know how we're implementing the recommendation, and the feedback from that has been very good.
And the surgeries, the surgeries by
October.
by residents' officers, I think they've now done a drop-in service, haven't they?
No, that was implemented in October.
Yes, how's that going? Because in certain places I wouldn't want to mention, unfortunately, some of the resident service officers haven't been turning up to their surgeries, and so I was just that's anecdotally seems like Barry's had the same experience.
We would want to know the details.
State action.
Okay, right. But before the surgeries, where they say they're going to come and assess an hour at a certain time, they haven't turned up. How are we observing that, and what's being done to address that where it comes to your attention?
So when officers are on leave or where we have a vacant patch, we always make sure that the surgeries are attended because they're published and our resident will turn up anyway. The only time that we didn't have surgeries was over Christmas and New Year period, and we ensured that we sent text messages to our tenant to say that it wasn't happening over the 2-week period. Apart from that, I'm not aware of any. But if there are, I would want to know about it so that we can follow up, please. We want to know.
Just in terms of the stock condition survey, we said we do 20% internals by the end of March, and we are ahead of target.
You said you were tracking behind in December or November.
Yeah, not anymore.
Oh, good. Are you happy?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that then. Congratulations again. Thank you. Well
Thank
done. Sorry, it's news to me, some of what you just said. So, I'm also vice chair of the East Central Forum. So that has never been on our agenda about the surgeries. So, it would be great that even on all the local housing forums, that could come down there. It's just a suggestion, because I think it's good, however, I think there are areas to be able to improve on. So there's one area that I really want to see improved on. So these boards that have been set up, what are the status of these residents? Are they to be classified as council staff or volunteers or what? Because obviously part of the reasons why, some of you may not know, that there needs to be buttress in the code of conduct is because, there is a conversation going on about what that status is going to be. If anything happens to them, because the risk assessment is not being undertaken before these people take this thing. So I think that clarification is going to be required. So when can that happen?
They're not council staff. They're volunteers. They're paid volunteers because I think it's important that we recognize the time of our resident, especially for something as crucial as the kind of scrutiny that we'll be expecting them to put us through. So we will be reimbursing them for participating, but they're definitely not council staff. And I think we made that clear to them when we did the induction. There is an induction part that was given to them in February when we launched the boards. And part of that is also conversations around expectations, around code of conduct, and we will be having intensive trainings so that that's clearer to residents.
Right, so is there going to be a role for every session of that board to have a monitoring officer present at them?
Not a monitoring officer, but we're going to have an independent consultant who will be assisting and providing support to the board, including SGTO.
Okay, thank you. All good. Do other members have any questions? Yes, Councillor Tester.
Thank you. On the Good Landlord Progress update, I wanted to just ask a quick question about this paragraph 79 for reference. So talking about the delivery of new homes at Ledbury, Tustin, Abbeyfield and Aylesbury. They're saying that remains ongoing. And obviously one of those is not like the others, which is the Abbeyfield estate, where to my understanding, and I think at least certainly to residents' understanding, there hasn't actually been any final decision yet made on what the form of new homes will look like at that estate. And obviously that there's no kind of further detail given within this update. I was wondering if you would be able to kind of confirm at least the understanding of the kind of the timescales for that regeneration and when a sort of decision or at least the kind of next steps is going to be made on the kind of form of regeneration that might be happening at that estate.
I'm sure Hakim's going to add in the detail, but Councillor Dennis and myself will be meeting in the coming weeks to make sure that we get that information to you.
There. Because there will be a paper to cabinet on, for cabinet, because it's a cabinet decision on what to do with, as you know, we've already demolished Maydew, and the decisions that residents want to know is what we're doing with Damaria and Thaxted. But just to be clear, we've done a specific or dedicated stock condition survey on Damaria and Thaxted, and the report tells us works that we need to do immediately and works that are medium to long term. And my colleagues are putting together information that we're going to take to residents. We're going to have a residents meeting where we're going to share with them the works we're going to do and the timescales for doing it.
Thank you. I think that's particularly for Damaria and Thaxted, I think that will be incredibly welcome, because I think we've had a good year or so of resident steering group meetings where it feels like there's been no kind of update on those works for those two buildings. So I think that would be really appreciated. So I just want to say thank you for that.
Yes, Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Chair. On the stock condition survey, so there's a figure given for the number of homes that have failed the decent homes standard, which is 241 out of 2,089. How does that track with what our understanding was prior to the stock condition surveys of how many homes we had met the decent home standard?
So before the stock condition survey, we were running at about 74% decency. And after the stock condition survey, we're running at about 88%, but it's still a small sample.
So just to understand, does that mean that the condition of our stock is better than we believed it to be?
For the sample that we've done, yes.
I wanted to ask about Plantific. This is something that has become scrutiny before, as an overview and scrutiny. Now that it's been used for a while, how is the cost effectiveness going? How is there were concerns at the time about the logistics of implementing it with our processes and so on. So it'd be good to get an understanding of if it's costing as we expected it to, or if there are any unexpected issues, or if we're happy with how it's working.
In terms of Plantific, we started using Plantific in November, I believe, so it's still quite early, and we're only using it on communal orders. So we haven't got a lot going through Plantific at the moment, but what we have seen is we can get better visibility of how our contractors are performing. So we know right first time is quite good, and first time fix is good. And we know appointments made and kept is good so far. There's not enough detail to do an analysis of cost at this stage.
Councillor Harper.
Thank you. It was a question about stock condition surveys and how transparent are we being with that information? I mean, obviously it will be, imagine, publicly available eventually, but are we going out to residents and saying, this is what we found about where you live, this is what we're thinking, how, I guess in terms of the kind of comms questions around kind of other issues, is this something we're going to actively be telling our residents we found or not, or is there plans with that, or at the moment is it just internal knowledge?
So at the moment we're trying to meet our target of 20% by March, and then we're doing another 40 by September this year. Sorry, another 20 to make 40%. And when we get to that stage, we are going to put together an asset management strategy. And in putting that strategy together, we are going to involve residents, so a wide group of residents, to take a view on what we found in our stock condition survey and the budget that we have to spend, if that answers your question.
I guess it's like you're going to residents and saying, we've got money, we've identified issues, but in terms of saying, this is your stock condition compared to like X, like being kind of upfront about what our findings are, you know, kind of being as open as possible.
Do you mean to individual tenants and say to them, the flat next door, the condition is this compared to yours, or are you saying as a landlord generally, or compared to other landlords? I'm not clear.
I'm not really saying this is what I'm recommending, which is why I'm not saying you should go to each neighbour and say this is. I'm wondering what our plan is, apart from that kind of point about saying how we're going to strategise about managing the repairs to your building, but like being really upfront and honest about the state of our buildings and kind of telling residents that or not.
Well, oh, sorry.
I would expect when we're building this asset management strategy as a cabinet member to understand where we're going to direct our resources and being clear about why we're doing that. So through a cabinet report or through our strategy, we would be saying, I would want to see, as a resident and as a cabinet member, I would want to see, for example, the North Peckham estate, this is the standard that is at, this is the reason why we're going to be resourcing in such a way. We've had conversation with residents, and this is what we said that we're going to be able to do, and with the scope of that, the residents have said this is where they would like their specific money to be directed. So that's how I would like to see us showing the results of the stock condition survey and where our HRA are going to be able to direct the resources. So that's what I would like to see.
Yeah, it's clear. Just as an addendum to Ketsia Harper's point, which is an important one. So I give you access to my home. You've done the survey, November 2025. I don't hear anything back until some strategy comes out of cabinet sometime in the future. So I've given you access to my home. You've not told me what you found, nothing, until sometime in the future where you say, actually, your windows need doing, that needs doing, this needs doing. I find that a bit confusing. So what do you say to residents when you turn up to that? Not you specifically, because I know you're not doing the work, but when operatives go to people's homes, what do they say? We're going to come and check your home. I'm curious what the comms is.
So, if I may, I understand totally what you mean, what the concerns are in this, but the purpose of a stock condition survey is to plan investment, and we tell residents from the start. So the letter they get, all of the comms, the press release, if you go on our website, all of it is about so we can know how to spend your money on your homes. It's not about individuals. Having said that, we have reports on every individual property that has been visited. And if a tenant wants to know, we can share it with them. But the purpose of the stock condition survey is not that. And therefore, for every home, we don't then send them a report so that they have it. Because on its own, it doesn't mean much. What it does is tells us, because obviously we have a finite amount of money on an annual basis, and we will not be able to do everything that needs doing in one go. So it's about planning, what is priority and what isn't, and that is when we engage residents on, because there will be things that are statutory, there will be things that are regulatory, and they are non-negotiable, but there are other things that aren't. And therefore, we can engage with residents about how we prioritize those things.
That's clear. Thank you. For planning and leaseholders, so I suspect at some point you have to start having discussions about what kind of works will be done after the strategy is implemented. There'll be a consultation period. What's the kind of time horizon that you have in mind for once from the point stock condition survey is done to informing leaseholders that X needs to be done because it's urgent and it's a major work, and X amount will need to be contributed. Do you have a timeline, or is that still to be confirmed based on what happens come the formulation of the strategy?
Yeah, it's still to be confirmed, and we hope to get the strategy signed off hopefully in October Cabinet. And if we get it signed off, we'll be looking to try and start works the following financial year. But we'll be informing leaseholders with this timescales that we would normally about major works.
Thank you. No, I don't think there's any other questions from members. Thanks for your time, Cabinet member and officers. Oh, yes.
Confirm what your I'm going to get back to you. What your question was, because we both kind of had slightly different hearing of it. So I just wanted to confirm it so that I can come back to you properly on your.
Through you, Jeff. Thank you. My question is that people that want to downsize, my understanding, and it's been my understanding for many years, is that they are told that if they've got a 4-bedroom property, they'll only be accepted to downsize to a band 1, to become a band 1 or a band A, as you said, if they give up 3 bedrooms.
No, that's not. That's definitely not in the allocation scheme. So people are prioritised for band A.
Yeah.
And they are prioritised to move to a property that meets their bedroom requirement size.
Yes.
So if they were in a 4-bed and their bedroom requirement was a 2-bed, they are not entitled to move to a 3-bed unless they are of pension credit age, and then they are allowed to have that extra bedroom above their bedroom requirement. Does that answer your question?
Are they all band A?
Yes.
That was well.
Yes.
It's apparent.
Yeah. But there is a I think with the bedroom, I just wanted to clarify the kind of bedroom question, because there is that thing of your bedroom requirement entitlement, but that is flexed of people of pension age, and I know that you had a question about
And it can be with people that have disabilities and want relatives to come and stay with them at times. So they have an extra bedroom.
In the current allocations policy, it is specifically people of pension credit age. In the new scheme that we're looking at, we're looking to be more flexible around that arrangement.
Okay, no, thank you. That answers my question.
Thank you very much. So we'll go to the next item. We're going to move this item, the item that should have been next, a bit further up, and just note the outcome of the review for the Canada Estate, Fair Street, Devon Mansions, and Kirby Estate major works projects report. So it's just for noting. I don't think there's anything else that needs to be said to this. Go for it.
Sorry, Chair, it's just on the kind of the agenda. Appreciating that I'm new on this commission and I haven't so I'm just catching up a little bit. So this report appears both under item 5 and item 7. Is that right? I just wanted to understand when the agenda was drawn up, what the intention was exactly for how these conversations would go.
Yes, in reality, the item 7 should have been noted in the previous meeting. We've just moved it to this meeting. It should have been noted in the previous meeting, and that way it would have prefaced what was ultimately discussed and asked questions about. Officers, and cabinet member, you can go home. You're dismissed. Thank you very much. Congratulations, Abby. Thank you. So I think we're just going to discuss the recommendations now. Is everyone okay to just crack on with the recommendations, or do you want to take a 2-minute break? Or
2-minute break.
yeah. you want so the recommendations as noted? Oh, sorry. This is document cabinet draft 4.
This one.
Have maybe do people want a couple minutes to read through it properly? Okay, you already have. Good. Did anyone have any specific comments on these recommendations or revisions? We'll start off there, and then we can maybe go to what we discussed today, and if there's any additional recommendations we wish to make. It's worth mentioning that we made a ton of recommendations regarding Devon Mansion et al. Following the report about two meetings ago, of which it went to cabinet, and they were all accepted, of which we received an update as to how those are progressing. But were there any recommendations here on paper that you had any comments or questions on? Yes.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, just for my benefit as a new member on the Commission, just for this one meeting, just so I understand, so the Commission's been making its recommendations throughout the year. Is that the case? So this draft report reflects only recent meetings. Is that right? There's been a kind of like steady stream of recommendations coming from the Commission throughout the year.
That's correct.
So okay, just
work tonight.
Okay, and then tonight, so we did talk about Devon Mansions, but some of that will have been covered in existing recommendations. Is that the case?
Yeah, that's correct. But equally, we saw things like the timeline. They've mentioned the timeline. It hasn't been. It's been revised, but it hasn't been communicated to residents. So, to me, that seems like a kind of gaping opportunity for us to recommend something around communications of timelines to residents in a kind of fit and proper way. Which, to me, I wasn't convinced by some of the answers that were given around, communications to residents about timelines when things are being moved, or whether they're realistic or not. It just struck me that there was one newsletter and that was it. So it kind of feels to me as a natural place for us to recommend something around timelines being properly communicated to residents through more frequent comms, in letter or text or whatever it needs to be.
Definitely sounds reasonable. I think, I just wanted to check exactly so that I wasn't, going to cover old ground, although perhaps I'll do so inadvertently, and you can let me know. Otherwise, I'm happy to go through the recommendations, although having not been present for the meetings, I will, have limited comments on them.
Cool. Yes, Ketsia Harper?
I like that I'm Ketsia Harper as opposed to Councillor. No, it's good. I like it, but it is like... I prefer it. So it's actually recommendation 5.11, which is about housing delivery, and I guess this meeting we had where the developers came in, I found it very interesting, but it kind of didn't feel like anything they were asking for was really for the council's benefit. It felt more like it was for their benefit, which that makes sense. But I wonder whether this recommendation could either be kind of more specific, so it's involving developers earlier in the design and development process with the aim of ensuring X amount of social housing all the targets met, rather than it just being something where the council's aiding a developer to put in a submission and it's going to happen quicker, but it doesn't actually result in a benefit for us.
I mean, on reading this, I don't see the direct benefit of having this recommendation, to be honest, because it just doesn't feel to me as if it adds much value to the current process in planning or otherwise. It just feels to me like developers ought to be involved in. I'm sure they'll be involved in the design of and development for ones that they have a financial.
Well, I mean, they'll be
benefit.
working with a planning officer when they're doing a big scheme.
Which happens anyway.
Yeah. I didn't write this recommendation.
I'm kind of minded to zap it, but.
So I think it could be made slightly clearer, because my reading of this is actually more when the council is looking to procure the services of a developer when it's trying to bring forward its own regeneration or its own developments. And from my reading of it, it's that you're bringing it forward at an earlier stage of the design process to save redesigns once you get a developer involved. Because once, kind of within that process, when the council is procuring a developer, they'll normally have a bit of an outline of roughly what it is that they want, but sometimes you might have gone further down the kind of like REBA design stage, by which case when a developer comes in and has their own particular way of wanting to develop a building, there would be inevitable redesigns and therefore additional costs incurred. So I think it could be made clearer that this is talking about when the council is procuring the services of developers. I think that might help with making that a bit clearer.
Yeah, but in my head, if the council is procuring the services of a developer in a development that's, I guess, principally the council's, but they just need a partner agency or developer, it would make sense to me for the developing partner to have been chosen before the council even gets to the design stage anyway, because that's what I would have naturally thought, but correct me.
I don't think that's necessarily the case. Obviously, I can sort of speak of my experience of being a ward councillor where we've got the Abbeyfield Estate regeneration. So there's kind of various stages at which you can kind of procure the services of a developer, and quite often you will have done some level of feasibility works that will include early design stages before you even go through the expense of procuring a developer. You want to know, is it possible to build a scheme that is going to stack up? So I think I agree. I don't think it's the strongest maybe recommendation in the world. I don't know if we're going to get that much out of it, but I think that's probably a way of just making it so it's a little bit clearer as to what it actually refers to.
Sure. Cool. I'll be interested in the thoughts of others. Yes.
I think. Oh, sorry. Do you want to go ahead? I do think that they read as rather weak recommendations at the moment, and I agree basically that either they should be beefed up so that there's a bit more, either in the outcome or something a bit more substantive that we're asking for, or scrapped entirely. I suppose it does feel perhaps for the Commission's purposes that having had the conversation and no recommendations arise from it feels like, oh, we didn't get what we wanted out of it. But maybe that's just the case, So I think that it'd be reasonable to lose them if there's nothing to be agreed on bolstering them.
Andrew?
I think after listening to everyone, I think, Chair, if you believe that we don't need this, and he has to go back to the drawing board, then that's what we need to look at, because there are certain development right now that were speeded up, and certain important elements of it were missed out, which were also statutory. So if that needs buttressing, then that's what we send back for them to make it clearer and more robust, to make sure that we don't fall foul of any legal obligation that we may have.
Sure. Yeah, Councillor Hargrove.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know if I think basically from my memory of it, it was kind of talking about how difficult it is to build in the kind of current context and climate, and developers were saying this would make it easier for us to build cheaper, but I don't feel like the margin of benefit it would create for them would go anywhere near kind of funding just one extra social rented unit on a kind of development, is the vibe I got.
Sure. And I think for me, I guess any recommendation we come up with needs to be specific. It needs to be measurable. It needs to be achievable. It needs to be, I guess, realistic, and needs to be time bound, and I'm not quite sure if this passes in its current form passes the test. That I get the point that others make, that if we can bolster it, maybe it can achieve that. But it doesn't feel like there's a strong movement of energy towards this recommendation, unless I'm wrong.
We're talking about 5 and 6. They're quite similar.
Yeah, I was principally talking about 5. I mean, for 6, the signing of Section 106 agreements, I mean, personally speaking, I can see a good case for how that can be expedited and how we could hold officers properly to account in terms of the time frame in which that's done post. But for 5, I feel slightly weaker. Interested in other thoughts here.
Yeah, maybe it is somewhere, I don't know, but these need some narrative with them, don't they? These recommendations.
Yep.
Can I just check that the recommendations that are basically directed at planning, is this the right, place for that? Does that make sense, the Section 106 recommendation? I just wanted to check that with Adam. And the other thing I was going to say on this is that I just think as it reads in a way that is rather generic, in the sense that you could do any kind of process and replace signing Section 106s with something else and submit that as a recommendation, and it wouldn't really do very much. It could say void turnarounds, could say anything. I find it to be a little bit thin as well.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point, because from a planning perspective, there's the planning document, the Southwark plan, which I think is up for revision either this year, well, I think at some point this year, of which I don't think our recommendation will have any binding force to it. So even if this went to Cabinet, I'm not quite sure it would have any influence on the SPD that will come out and have a legal hearing. So, I'm happy to kind of counsel both, frankly, unless anyone feels very strongly against that. Cool. Okay. Fine. So those are gone. Any thoughts on others?
Chair, can I propose a recommendation, or is this the right time to do that?
Yeah,
I did want to return to something what Ina mentioned, before we returned, basically, and bring it into this forum a little bit. And it does pertain, I think, to the conversations that we just had around the Devon Mansions report. Because there was a question that was asked about the clawback mechanism. I think you asked it, actually, Chair, about the clawback mechanisms that we have in place now with our contractors, and that, there was an issue raised about default processes, which is, I guess, is a similar type of thing. There's penalties and so on. Obviously, those didn't exist previously, so we can't use them. But I think, given the lack of, if we didn't have formal contracts, then that does suggest that there is something to explore there. If we'd had a contract that simply didn't have the mechanism, it would be very clear cut. It is shocking, by the way. I know this will have been discussed in many prior commissions and stuff, but it is incredible. It is the sort of thing you read and, it is wild, really. But given that, it feels like there might be scope for the Commission to make a recommendation, in that kind of explore language about options to claw back costs that arose as part of this, legally dubious semi-contractual relationship that we used to invest millions of pounds in our estates. So I don't know exactly the wording, but something like that. But I'd welcome comments from anybody, but whether Adam has a view on that as well.
Yeah,
I saw that I'm strong enough. The most important legal point in clawing back is the technical completion. So now the contracts are still not closed because they can't find the work logs, they can't find whatever they paid for. So maybe the recommendation should be very strict, like saying prior the technical completion, it has to be proved that the clawback and all the money would be recovered, wherever the money are to be recovered. Because if the technical completion is done, then the contract is finished. So having a legal challenge after the contract is finished is going nowhere. While if you do the legal challenge prior, then you have different leverages of contractors going in other parts of the borough. So there are much more many triggers you could control your contractors to pay back. Because it's so much money. Is yeah, my heart is broken.
Thanks. I think that's a good idea, and maybe that the actual recommendation could be, it could be that we ask for legal advice that is then presented to the Commission in future on the, you know, the prospects for such a challenge.
yeah, I think that sounds good.
Well, so just to clarify a couple of things. So the recommendations need to be almost formulated to the final wording kind of tonight. There can be some finessing, but it needs to be pretty much the final wording here. And just the other thing is, we can only make the Commission can only make recommendations to Cabinet, and Cabinet will respond to those. So we can't constrain a future Commission in any way, or we can't delay work that this one should be done. So we can say something, we recommend X to Cabinet, and Cabinet can say yes, no. But that's that, and then that's the end of the conversation. So that's why I think it needs to be.
I think that sounds fine.
Yeah. Writing a recommendation down.
Shall I suggest some form of wording? Making it up, obviously, but something like that Cabinet produce legal advice around the possibility of clawing back the costs for the Canada Estate and Devon Mansions major works prior to the technical completion.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, claw back the costs for the works that were uncompleted.
I think there are other estates. Go on.
Yeah, that's the exact point I was about to make. I was like, I don't know if we necessarily want it to be limited to just those, because obviously we have Kirby, Arica House and Chiltern Grove as well. Yeah.
Adam, do you want to read that back to us just so we know what it says?
Yeah, so the Cabinet requests sorry, and the cost of works.
The legal word is technical completion of the contract. So in that point, everything is closed.
Okay.
So I think it's just the addition of the phrase prior to technical completion of the contract at the end of the recommendation.
Okay.
Are we agreeing that, Chair? I don't.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean.
Maybe I'm fussing overly about this because there's nobody else in the room, but I do think we should still be using the microphone, shouldn't we, just for the purposes of the records.
Yeah.
I kind of feel that we've moved into a more chatty kind of mode, which is fine, but yeah.
I always believe that my voice is too strong.
That's right, we've all given up on that. So that there's a recording, because otherwise if we're just chatting without the microphone.
Yes.
Yeah, we're still on.
That's why we made it clear. Yeah, we're still on the record.
Okay. So it's good that I find before the communication server. The resident engagement strategy, we have to look through the time. We were supposed to have one in 2015, it was another one in 2018, it was another one in 2020. So it's quite weak given that effectively none of the reviews took place, not a single one. So this is a forced change in the resident strategy. So it's how could we put it in a way that is going to be delivered, given that the previous ones, they have been not. The question is for you. So it's very nice to have a strategy. The strategy is failing. We produce another strategy. It's failing again. We still don't have a review, and we produce another strategy. So it's a question for you how we are going to make it work this time. That is going to be a scrutiny rather than creating another strategy in 2 years' time.
Are you suggesting a recommendation?
I am questioning how could we write it in a stronger way that it has to be delivered, because previously, no, English is not my first language.
Okay, cool.
How could I make the...
This is recommendation 7.
Yeah. A sort of accountability of delivering the review.
Actually, yeah, Anna is right. So that phrase you just used, keeping track, maybe we build in a tracker to ensure that they report back what the progress is and how it's working. Because that way, I think we can measure the progress. And yeah, so the tracker may be the best way to marry all of that up.
Yeah.
Now, asking me to tie all of that up like Sam just did.
This is Scrutiny's work, which we have developed a Scrutiny recommendations action tracker, and the plan is to it exists, and the plan is to strengthen the tracking and return of information to the Commission as soon as possible. So that is happening. Again, it comes back to this thing that this commission can't constrain the next commission. So,
Okay.
you could make one could make a recommendation that says, on this topic, provide 3 monthly updates to the Housing Commission. But
Yeah, I'm not sure what about every 3 months. You have a tracker, you said?
so this is something that Scrutiny will be getting doing the work of tracking more regularly, and that's also why we're making an effort this year, as far as possible, to make the recommendations smart. Because if we don't have times attached to them, then we can't track their implementation.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, no, I hear you. Welcome that. Because in the Tenants Council, that's what we introduced, and it's been working very well. If we move it to half yearly, then it will give you time, like Chair said earlier on, to see how well it works, and you can see the data showing a particular trajectory, whether it's working or not working. So maybe part of what Aina is trying to address is the vagueness of it, because there's no real tangible mechanism attached to it in any way to say, okay, we can do this, because even they themselves, the officers, are going through a serious challenge at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, Sam, it does mention.
I'm aware that I wasn't at the meeting where this was discussed, so I just wanted to, I think, for me, it does seem like something where, I appreciate what Ina said, but there were, new bodies have been set up and additional engagement boards and so on, and it would make sense for a future commission to want to look at that. And I guess the question for what we do in the recommendation is whether what we want to bolster is some kind of more rigorous feedback mechanism within the strategy that would then be looked at by, potentially by a future commission or not, but that would be what the recommendation would be, rather than suggesting, this can come back to be looked at again. That kind of is what it is, but I don't know if we want to add, some language around, assessing the effectiveness for the residents on the boards, for example, like feedback from the residents who are on the boards about how they feel it works, something along those lines. Just that thought is prompted by the fact that from the Commission's perspective, you would probably want to speak to them. So it might be something that you build into the strategy anyway.
Maybe it's after sentence 2, we just. Yes.
What are we trying to achieve with this recommendation 7? because for me it looks like we're just asking for an illustration of good work of resident engagement and just seeing an example.
Yeah,
of good.
I think what we're trying to achieve from it is based on previous commissions, on the resident engagement strategy, though it's quite copious and there's loads of work, there isn't much illustration of engagement other than what we heard from the officer. So there wasn't anything explaining in the strategy, how it plays out in reality other than what we heard by the commission. So having the opportunity to see that on a regular basis in writing for residents to also be able to access it is helpful.
But I get from this, we're not seeking to micromanage the process,
No.
but what we are looking to see is a more fuller, wider, rounder process where we can see good examples of resident engagement. That's what it needs to include in that strategy. Is that correct? The document that gets produced?
Yeah, I mean it could be good and it could be things that are not so good.
So we're not criticising the process as such. We are talking about the production of a strategy, and that needs to be better done.
Effectively.
That's really what this is saying.
That's correct.
So it's not a process where targets there, and that's it, and that's not. It's not.
I don't think that's what we're looking for.
It's just asking for some.
What the process is we're going through to engage residents across different estates and understanding how that's being done as opposed to, I guess, specific targets.
Yeah.
Being put. I don't think that's our role as a commission. At least.
So, my view is it's quite a coherent recommendation, and I'm not sure that adding to it is going to improve it.
Fine. I'm happy. I'm happy to stick with it as it is. Cheers.
Sorry, I
Andrew
do.
knows more about this process.
It's as a resident and one of the people who. Sorry, as a resident and one of the people who actually have been involved in this, the experience has not been that of transparency, accountability when it's supposed to happen. So the reason why we're trying to get a reassurance to address the vagueness of it, it's nothing wrong with the document. It's just that when Anna is talking about those dates, which dates back over a decade, there's a reason for it that if something is not working, you have to have a mechanism to address it on time. That's why we ask for the review. So part of these snag or choke points have come around when officers haven't felt that they were strong enough to handle the implementation one and the follow-up to ensure that they were delivering, So in the end, the residents then take control of it, which is like counterintuitive, and we shouldn't be doing that. So we need to have a proper written down mechanism that gives us a tool to be able to get us back on the pathway to correct any mistakes that's been done. So as it stands, it doesn't really factor in a proper review period.
Okay.
Yeah, you're looking at me. So
Sorry.
come back. No, you're looking at me.
I didn't regularly.
So what it seems to me with this recommendation is it's not trying to write failures of resident engagement over a number of years. It's not trying to reflect those points that both Ina and you, Andrew, made. I don't recall them being discussed in the meeting. you know, but maybe they were. It seems to me that we've got a recommendation here, and we are potentially going to be taking it out of context to make a point about something else. I don't know. Just reading this myself is that what it's calling for is to see examples of good resident engagement in going forward, and not. Yeah, I think sometimes to bring all the failures of the past up and try to, it can just muddy the water a bit.
I didn't mean, it was just an example. I didn't mean to put it at words. I said that I don't know. I didn't want. I just said that to put a review time. I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't say to put my words about the past. I just explained the past so we could prevent the future to happen.
I just understand. I do understand that residents have a lot of voluntary time. They give a lot of voluntary commitment, and then they feel that their views are not reflected. And you know, I'm with you on that. It's just that I feels like now it's now 8. Is it 8:30 or
9:30, 9:40?
Yeah, I mean we are. You know, we're trying to fit angels and pinheads at the moment.
Yeah, no, I agree. That cabinet used the next revision of the resident engagement strategy. Did we get a sight of when the next resident engagement strategy would be released, Adam?
No, nobody's mentioned one. No.
So we don't even know if it's...
So that's why...
Sorry, very quickly. As a point of clarification, I think the resident engagement strategy was agreed in December 2025, wasn't it? So I'm not surprised there's not another revision of it due anytime soon, given the recency of that.
Yes.
The timeline that is, January 2027 fits in with the original review period that we suggested from last Tenants Council.
Okay.
So we suggested 18 months. Now, so because we initially adopted the draft and asked it to come here, because with the implementation time they wanted to, which was August, was not good enough. Right, but we said we'll adopt that so long as they make certain recommendations. So the review period originally was suggested was 18 months. So based on the adoption in December, so they decided to go for a year. So we're not challenging the review period. We just want to make sure that it is very clear in the document that it does happen, because all the previous review. Right, so we're not saying it should be happening every month, every 3 months or whatever. So so that we don't have to come here every time and then start doing interpretations.
I think where I stand on this now is that...
Sorry, did you want to do...
If you have a tracker, that they track this and make sure that the next commission looks very closely at when the revised strategy is going to come out, so that they can at least be able to scrutinise it, is my position on this.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool.
The meeting recommendations.
No. If
So, to be fair, that's sort of what I understood from what you said as well, in the sense that if this is more about what we want the next commission to do than what we want to change within the strategy, then we don't really need a recommendation on that.
It's me. Sorry, so I've got kind of two things I'd quite like to suggest, and one of them is relatively controversial, not controversial, but I do think that it would be beneficial to have a recommendation which is about looking at when a void is becoming a temporary accommodation void, which will be there for between 5 and 20 years, whether or not it is more appropriate for that to become a permanent let. And obviously this relates to situations going on the Aylesbury estate, but I think as more and more of our properties become like at risk of demolition, it's going to become a wider issue across the borough. And, you know, I feel quite safe in saying this because this was not something which was happening near me. The Aylesbury estate is a massive estate, but there was an area which was only used as temporary accommodation, and there was absolutely like catastrophic like impacts. There was like 12 fires in 1 year in one single block. One person died. There was just like sites of open drug use that like vulnerable families could come like be at, and that is what happens when you've got like a large amount of temporary accommodation. They weren't using the whole block for temporary accommodation, but I think it is something which should be considered. And you know, I understand people saying there's no kind of difference being a temporary accommodation resident and a council resident, but there is a difference. I think we all know that in terms of like how someone settles, and even if their house isn't going to be there for like more than 5, 10 years, 15 years, that they will have a tenancy in Southwark is different to being a temporary accommodation like resident. That you could be moved somewhere completely out of the borough. You're not going to be laying down roots in the same way. So I would like there to be a recommendation which asks the Cabinet to consider if there is a process for, or kind of a point at which voids, being long-term voids for temporary accommodation, could be re-looked at as permanent lets. And just the other thing I was going to say was something about making the stock condition surveys transparent. Anyway, so that's one.
Yeah, I'm not trying to block the suggestion there, but I'm just thinking how this works in reality, because if those properties that are currently temporary voids become permanent, then there'll be a home search process on that, and that the people that would get them are probably highest on the bidding system. And it might be that these temporary accommodations are being used to provide urgent accommodation for families that are in real crisis. And there is a risk that once you make it about permanent accommodation, then it opens those properties up to a different demographic or a different group of people, and then you have that a homeless crisis where people then have to go and live in bed and breakfast or other less suitable accommodation. That's all I would say about that. I'm not knocking back, because Cabinet will have to decide, and they know what they want. You know, they'll have to take all those things into consideration anyway. But that is the only thing that strikes me about that suggestion as troublesome potentially.
So just yeah, on this recommendation, I think what it speaks to is the uncertainties of long-term regeneration projects, which is obviously very pertinent to the Aylesbury, but I guess as a recommendation, there's a broader principle that we might be advancing around it. So I think for, with the Aylesbury as an example, somewhere like Taplow, one of the reasons they bring it back into use is partly it's temporary accommodation budget pressures and the housing crisis more broadly, partly it's a recognition of the delays in the regeneration project. So the reason why we're talking about these longer timescales is because the longer it goes on and the more there's these judicial reviews and uncertainty, the actual likelihood of it occurring at all, in fact, decreases. And even if it were to occur, then the timescales in which it happens keep stretching out longer and longer. And that just introduces the question of, are we then using our housing stock in the best way when, rather than giving secure tenancies to our residents? I mean, I think to Barry's point, I definitely appreciate that people in temporary accommodation have very high housing need, but if you could imagine, as a principle, I'd say we would prefer to have council tenancies in the same way that it would be highly controversial if the council were to respond to temporary accommodation pressures by converting existing blocks of council tenancies to temporary accommodation, for example. So I think that basically I support the recommendation. I think it can be around a mechanism through which to review decisions taken to turn decanted blocks into temporary accommodation based on the timescales for regeneration, because the Aylesbury, that decision around decanting the whole estate over a long period of time has obviously taken a long time ago, and there have been many twists and turns in the progress of the regeneration since then. So it seems reasonable to then go back and look again and say, well, given where we are now, I mean, they did do that and they decided to use it for TA, but then you might want to say, given where we are now, maybe it's not going to come down for 10 years. Maybe it's actually worth housing people going through the decanting process again in the future if we get to that point. So that, I think does that make sense to you?
A mechanism through which seems to me sensible. Councillor Tester?
Sam's point about specifically decanted, I think that's useful, but also basically there's people leaving the Aylesbury estate who their empty flat, they were a permanent tenant and they've moved to Scotland, and their flat is becoming temporary accommodation even in the later phases, which are going to be there for 20-30 years. And so it's also those sorts of properties, and I think that is going to become a situation on other estates as well.
I think I would also generally support the recommendation. I think it's certainly a sensible thing for Cabinet to be considering and having a look at. I think, and I'm not necessarily volunteering to make the wording of this here because I don't think I know it as well as the people in the room, but I think it will need to be quite strongly worded so that Cabinet can't go, well, we thought about it and then said no. So I think that's just something to sort of consider, but I think it's certainly a good recommendation.
I mean, Cabinet to explore the opportunity for a mechanism to review the kind of typology is no bad thing, and that's for them to kind of explore and look at, but others can tell me if they disagree with that.
Oh, you should have used So, when you look at the fact that council is carrying out stock condition survey, and some of this was trialed on other estates like the Ledbury, so my role in the past as generic housing officer for this borough and Lewisham, the question I would ask is, what happens when that particular building becomes a hazard? Because if it's not, if it has structural problems, it develops it, which is one of the other reasons like Ledbury happened, and then the time came for it to, the authorities decided that based on health and safety, it didn't. So what would happen in that case if you've already made some of these people secure tenants? Because it's a good idea, but would it be best to find a different mechanism under the local lettings policy or intermediate tenancy to kind of grade them up? Because, like you said, son, when the time comes for it to be demolished, where are you going to put them?
They have to do that anyway.
No, but that's the thing. That's the property factors I'm talking about.
My point is it would only be something which should be like introduced when it's been kind of decided that it's safe for people to live and beneficial to live in these properties at least for 5 years. Because obviously if there is an incident where like there's the building structurally unsafe, then no one should be housed there. So I think recognising that we have these properties which we are saying it's fine for people to live in them for like 20 years plus, it's in those situations I think maybe it's appropriate to look at the tenancy type.
So that will be reasonable in terms of if it's a minimum of 5 years, because it will be cost effective. Anything less than that would not be.
Yeah,
I'm just.
Yeah, I don't think it's for us to kind of opine on the years, because I think based on the information we've heard today, I don't think we have enough knowledge to kind of advise on what a suitable time period would be or not. I think the most we can ask for is for Cabinet to just explore, which to me just seems best. I mean, it goes without saying it would have been great if we had more opportunity to look at this issue in a bit more detail throughout the municipal year, because then at least our recommendations would have been based on a bit more evidence and understanding. But based on just the one meeting we've had, which was principally an interview with the Cabinet member, which was quite wide-ranging, it just seems to me that having kind of something too specific, number one, wouldn't be best, because we lack the kind of knowledge and understanding that we need to be able to make that specific recommendation. So something around exploring the opportunity to review some sort of mechanism would be a good idea. I've not got the specific wording in front of me, but I'm sure Councillor Harper might have. Okay, cool.
Maybe, well, if you're drafting that, should we talk about the other suggestion? There was a bit more conversation maybe around because you asked about this, Chair, as well, this question about residents' understanding of the outcomes of their own stock condition checks. And that was mentioned. Councillor mentioned that as a possible recommendation. So, no, I don't have a wording on it, but I just thought while this is being drafted, we could. I don't know if other members of the Commission think that it's something for us to speak on around, greater information provided residents who've had their properties surveyed about.
I thought it could have gone in the recommendations.
Its condition and the condition of the properties and what that, the implications of that or whatever. I suppose if someone's had their home checked and it's not up to a decent standard, they'd want to know that, and that's the spirit of any recommendation we make, perhaps.
Yes. Which I think, well, the answer we got was that there was going to be a Cabinet report sometime in September, October, about this, of which they would then, I guess, the relevant households would be informed. I guess communication's already gone out to, we were told, to all the 2,000 plus households, saying that a stock condition survey will be done. I guess the paper that will come out in September will then set out the strategy for which a further communication, I would imagine, will then follow to explain, okay, post the survey, this is what now needs to be done, and this is what the time period would be. I guess for me, I was satisfied by that answer. Was anyone dissatisfied with the answers that officers gave on that? To me, it seemed fairly self-explanatory.
As somebody who's trialed this on their estate, and during COVID, so one of the things.
Stock condition survey during COVID.
No, so we had the major works. So
Okay, right.
because of they had to come and check your property first anyway, and we, because of health and safety and risk assessment, we had to include a survey so that you can either tick whether you want it there and after they finish the survey, or you can wait and request it at a later date. So it's this because of the tenancy agreement stipulation that landlord obligation, you have to provide that document and transparency. So that kind of achieve both ends. So I don't know if you want to consider that as another angle. You have a survey type waiver or whatever it is that when they come to do the survey in your property, you can actually stipulate that you want it after they finish instead of waiting to go and request it at a later date. It's just a simple.
Yeah, in terms of a recommendation, I'm just trying to think of something that's specific, measurable, achievable. It based on what the answers that were given, there wasn't anything glaring that stood to me as an issue that needed to be addressed through a recommendation for Cabinet to consider.
Sorry, I'm a bit. Basically, I just think if we're kind of doing all this work, saying we're trying to be transparent, we've noticed there's been some issues with contracts on Devon's Devon managed estates with contracts, and we want to make sure residents are able to engage. We've done this massive piece of work to look at the kind of condition of all our properties. Is that not an opportunity to be and you can find out about that here? I mean, it does enable people to find out information about their properties that Southwark maybe doesn't want them to know. But I think if we are kind of serious about meaningful engagement and meaningful transparency, given that we're doing this huge piece of work, that should be information which is available to residents.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought they said that's what would happen once the strategy was released in September.
To me, it sounded like they were saying, and then we will go to the residents and say, these are the things we've identified, what do you think? But that's different from having kind of a central portal where people can go and find it out themselves without having to kind of be ask the questions, but oh, well, you're saying there's a problem with my windows, but what about my walls? What about my doors? That's kind of that's you have to think about it and ask those specific questions and then get those answers back, rather than it being kind of something where you can just find that information publicly.
To which I guess a recommendation could be that Cabinet seek to make transparent or give residents the opportunity to get the information on the stock condition survey that's been conducted on their property. I mean, it's within the right, if you and I have had a stock condition survey done, we can request that information, right? Should we want to. I mean, creating a platform for it is ideal, but I'm not quite sure how difficult or easy that would be. Yeah.
Aren't the resident engagement and involvement processes there for that very purpose? The stock condition survey isn't about individual properties as individual properties. It's in terms of them in aggregate and how the council manage and manage the stock condition of an area or of a estate or of a block.
I thought they were individual.
Well, they will be carried out in individual properties, but I'm sure it's to get trends of what may be wrong with that block, or whether it needs more external decorations, or there's roof problems in that block. It's about major investment stock condition survey. It isn't going round looking to do repairs, individual repairs. Because the whole process, because the whole process is about how the council is managing the money that it has, and to make sure that the general stock across the council estate is kept up to a decent standard for everybody. That's what.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So what's informed part of this is that over the last few years, the last stock condition survey that was actually supposed to have been done before before Lacanau.
Yeah, it's a scandal.
See, no, but be it all well and good. The issue that's now happened is that those records are nowhere to be found.
Yes.
So a new one needs to be created so that we can actually, like Akim said, you can actually plan the maintenance work for this building. So this is the thing. So because right now you can't plan ahead without nothing. And this is what that is part of.
It sounds like you're both saying the same thing.
Yeah. Respect. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree with you. Well, it just sounded at the beginning you were saying there was no need for it. Maybe I misunderstood. Sorry.
It sounds as if we just want the residents to have the opportunity to access the information that they should have access to anyway, right?
I think for me, it's about it being easy to access. You don't have to go to a resident service officer. You don't have to send an email requesting specifically what you want. It's like we get these things which compare the council's performance compared to other councils. Like, so if somebody wants that to have an information about how their block compares to a block in a different ward, they'd have to find a neighbour in that block, ask them to go and speak to their officer, get that information, do the same themselves, and then compare them. But I'm not going to die on this hill, but I just want to make it clear, I think it's about kind of making this information transparent and easily accessible, which I don't think, the fact that you have the right to that information isn't the same thing. But that's fine. It would be a big piece of work. So
it sounds like it would be a huge piece of work, but I don't know. It just
Sounds to me like publishing the results.
yeah.
I don't know if that necessarily. I guess somone has to format them and whatever, but we could ask council to look at publishing the results of the stock condition survey and putting it on the website, a searchable document.
I think what might be naturally difficult is different individual properties having their information out in the public ether. So
we wouldn't want that on a kind of
No, so
basis.
that's why I think requesting the information, should you want it, would to me seem most reasonable, as opposed to having and I'm sure if a stock condition survey is done, what stops an officer from saying, sorry, we can't give you that information? I'm sure they'll want to.
I myself, and clearly there will be things that are discovered when they go into people's properties that may be a serious problem for those residents. But the stock condition survey is taking quite a long time already. And I think that in a way, to bring this element into it is a bit of a distraction. It's a bit of a distraction, and we want those officers to do this properly and to get a really good comprehensive stock condition survey as quickly as possible to make up for the lost time that there already is. And I'm not sure here if we're not just making a recommendation just for the sake of it.
Look,
To explore mechanisms available to enable properties.
Just read yours.
To explore mechanisms available to enable properties earmarked for demolition to be let as permanent tenancies in instances when the building will remain for a long time. That at the end is bad grammar.
So I made an illegible amendment on the piece of paper. I'll just read to say what I was going to say, which is that I was just going to add that it should say where there are delays, because if you knew for a fact that the building was going to come down, and everything was going to plan, then it does seem a bit illogical to decant the block, and then put people back in and then decant it for a second time. So the only reason you would ever do that is if there was issues with the project. So I think the idea of this, at least in my mind anyway, is that where there are problems and you have blocks standing empty for a substantial amount of period that was not envisaged, or that is stretching on for decades longer than it should have done, that there's something built in to look back and say, is it worth, the likelihood of this standing for a long time mean that it's worth reintroducing council tenancies. So to mention delays, basically.
Yeah, and forgive me, the meeting's going on a long time and we are labouring over quite minor points. But it seems to me that this is requesting to create more council tenants than the council has properties for. Because if these properties are going to be demolished in 5 years or sometime after that, then you've got more tenants than you have properties for, and then it creates a bigger housing waiting list.
Yeah, I don't think we should get so hung up on the point around whether or not this might come to pass or not. I think we just want to explore the possibility of it. And if the council say actually the possibility of this, for the reasons you give, are the reasons, then so be it. But we're not.
On your head be it then, I mean,
We're just saying we should explore what the possibilities are, and it could turn out actually the possibilities are wildly out of touch because of reasons unbeknown to us all. So I'm great. Yeah.
question, Chair. When we come to this meeting, and it's really appreciated, we get all the documents in paper form, and I don't know why we can't actually get them sent to our homes in advance, or does that just depend on individual?
That's beyond my pay grade.
Individual member, I can request it, can I?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's what I will do.
Thank you.
It's better.
Hard work on the commission this municipal year. And thank you, Sam, for stepping in last minute, your contributions too. And yeah, thank you, everybody. Special thanks to Ina and Andrew for your contributions too, and for Brendan, who can't be here today. And Vice Chair, thank you. I know you're stepping down, but your contributions have been great. So thanks, everybody. Thank you. Chair, that gets you at 10:15.